She was still laughing when I put the ring down on the table. And I do not mean some awkward little laugh, the kind people let out when they are uncomfortable and do not know what else to say. I mean a real laugh, the kind that shows up in your eyes, the kind that tells everybody in the room you honestly think something is funny. So what exactly was so funny? Her father had just stood there in front of 37 people and told them I was a gold digger. My mother heard it. My best friend heard it. Two of my co-workers, who had driven 3 hours from Nashville just to be there, heard it too. He said I had been after their family's money from the moment I met Natalie. He said it right there at our engagement dinner, in front of everyone. And Natalie laughed. My name is Ethan Walker. I am 35 years old, and I write software for a living. I built my company from a laptop in a one-bedroom apartment in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. What started as nothing more than long nights, cheap coffee, and a stubborn idea turned into a real business. Now it employs people. It pays their health insurance. It has stayed profitable every year since its second year. I did not come from money. I grew up with almost nothing, and everything I have now came from work. Hard work. Years of it. And for the last 2.5 years, I honestly believed I had found the one woman I wanted to share that life with. I was wrong. But before I tell you what happened that night, and before I explain what unfolded in the weeks after I laid that ring on the white tablecloth and walked out of that restaurant without saying a word, you need to understand something about me and Natalie. Because our story did not begin ugly. It began beautifully. And that is what made the ending hurt so much worse. Before we get into the whole thing, if stories like this mean something to you, if you believe a man's dignity is worth more than sitting in a room where people openly disrespect him, then subscribe, leave a comment, and give this video a like. It helps these stories reach more people, and I really do read what you write down there. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I met Natalie Whitmore at a tech conference in Nashville in the spring, 2 years ago. I was not even supposed to be there. My plan had been to send one of my developers, Logan, because I had 2 product deadlines breathing down my neck that week, and I had zero interest in standing around making polite conference small talk. But on Tuesday morning, Logan's wife went into early labor. So I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove down to Nashville myself. Natalie was speaking on a panel about user experience design in healthcare software. At the time, she worked for a mid-sized consulting firm based out of Brentwood. It was the kind of company that helped hospital systems across the Mid-South modernize their technology and move into the digital age. She was sharp, she was direct, and out of everyone sitting on that stage, she was clearly the person who had come the most prepared. At one point, someone in the audience asked one of those lazy questions. You know the type. It was not really meant to get an answer. It was meant to make the person asking it sound smart. Natalie answered him politely, but she also took his question apart piece by piece. I remember sitting there and thinking, that woman does not put up with fools. After the panel ended, I introduced myself. She was courteous, but I could tell she was busy and not looking to waste time. I handed her my business card and told her I had built a patient intake optimization platform that might be worth discussing. She looked down at the card, then looked back at me and said, I'll reach out if I think there's something there. That was it. Professional, straightforward, no flirting, no fake excitement, no pretending to be more interested than she actually was. 4 days later, she emailed me. What started as a simple business call turned into a 2-hour conversation. We talked about technology, small-town Tennessee, what it really means to build something instead of just managing something, and how both of us claimed to love the outdoors even though neither one of us had been camping since we were kids. Natalie had strong opinions about healthcare software, and she was not the least bit shy about saying them out loud. One of those opinions was that most platforms in that industry were designed by engineers who had never actually sat in a hospital waiting room. They had never felt what it was like to be the person on the other side of the intake process, scared, tired, confused, and just trying to get help. I told her she was right. She seemed a little surprised by how fast I agreed with her. So I explained that I had made the same argument to my own developers 3 months earlier, and because of it, we had made some serious changes to our product. She asked smart follow-up questions. I did the same. By the time that call ended, we had agreed to meet for coffee in Nashville the following weekend. By the time that coffee was over, I already knew I was in trouble. Not the bad kind of trouble. The other kind. The kind where you realize someone has gotten under your skin faster than you expected, and there is not much you can do about it. One of the first things I noticed about Natalie was that she had no interest in putting on some polished version of herself just to make other people comfortable. She said what she meant. She was direct, but she was not cruel. She had no patience for fake behavior or empty performance, and that made her easy to be around in a way I had not felt in a long time. I had dated women before who could impress an entire room, then drain the life out of you the second everyone else left. Natalie was different. When it was just the two of us, she was simple to be with. Natural. Comfortable. And when she was in public, she was impressive because she was not trying so hard to be impressive. There is a difference between those two things, and most people do not understand how much that difference matters. We dated for 8 months before I met her family. That was not an accident. Natalie had always been private about her personal life, and she told me early on that she did not bring a man home unless she was sure about him. So when she finally said she wanted me to come to Knoxville and meet her parents, I understood exactly what that meant. I drove up there on a Saturday in January, and I was nervous in a way I had not been since the first year of my company, back when I was pitching investors and trying to prove I belonged in the room. The Whitmore family lived in West Knoxville, in a house sitting on about 2 acres of land. It had a gate, a circular driveway, and a front porch that looked like it belonged on the cover of a Southern Living magazine. The house itself was older, built in a colonial style, and kept in perfect shape. It was the kind of property that looked like it had been standing there for generations and planned on standing there for generations more. It was not flashy the way new money can be flashy, with sharp modern lines, expensive surfaces, and furniture nobody actually wants to sit on. This was the opposite. That house said, without having to say it out loud, "We have been here a long time, and we are not going anywhere." I noticed that before I even stepped out of my truck. Natalie's father, Raymond Whitmore, was a commercial real estate developer. He was the kind of man who had made generational money, and even though he did not wave it around, you could still feel it on him. He was tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the careful manners of a man who had spent decades judging people from across boardroom tables. He shook my hand, poured me a bourbon I had not asked for, and spent the first hour asking me questions that sounded polite enough to pass as conversation, but were really closer to an interview, or maybe an interrogation. He asked what I did exactly. He asked how long I had been doing it. He asked whether the company was profitable. He asked if I owned the business outright, or if investors were still involved. I answered every question honestly. I told him I had founded my company 4 years earlier. I told him we had become profitable in our second year. I told him I had bought out my one early investor 18 months before and now owned 100% of the company. I explained that we had 12 full-time employees and 3 contractors, and that our recurring revenue was strong enough that I had not needed to touch my savings in more than 2 years. After each answer, Raymond nodded slowly. Not warmly, not coldly either. Just carefully, like he was typing numbers into a spreadsheet only he could see. Natalie's mother, Elaine, was much easier to talk to. She had been a high school English teacher before retiring early, and now she ran a small nonprofit that supported literacy programs in rural counties across East Tennessee. She asked me about my childhood, my parents, and the kinds of books I liked to read. Where Raymond was controlled and measured, Elaine was warm. By the end of that first dinner, I liked her. Raymond, I was not sure about, but I respected him. He was a man who had built something real, and he was protective of his daughter. I could understand that. I could even appreciate it. I was not offended by his questions. Honestly, I expected them. What I did not expect was everything that happened later. Over the next 18 months, Natalie and I grew closer in every way that mattered. Eventually, we moved in together. I bought a house in Nashville, in a neighborhood near Percy Warner Park. It was a real house, not some temporary place with boxes in the corners and furniture we planned to replace someday. It had a yard. It had a guest room. It had a kitchen big enough for 2 people to cook in at the same time without bumping elbows and starting an argument. Natalie decorated most of it. I paid for all of it. At first, that arrangement did not feel strange to either one of us. I made considerably more money than she did, and we were both practical enough to understand that without turning it into some uncomfortable issue. But Raymond noticed. Every time Natalie mentioned something new about the life we were building together, he seemed to catch it. A weekend trip to Asheville, a nice dinner reservation, the new couch she had picked out for the living room. And every time, he had something to say. At first, the comments were not direct. They were small, almost casual. "That sounds expensive," he said once, after Natalie told them about a weekend we had spent in Charleston. Another time, he said, "Ethan must be doing well." It was the way he said "must" that made it land wrong. It did not sound like a compliment. It sounded more like a question with a blade tucked inside it. I told myself I was reading too much into it. Natalie told me the same thing. Her mother told me Raymond was just protective and that I should give him time. So that is what I did. I gave him time. I proposed to Natalie on a Wednesday evening in November, on the rooftop of the Kimpton Ayrton Hotel in Nashville, the same place where we had gone on our first real date. I had the ring custom made. It was a round-cut diamond set in platinum, and I chose it with the help of a jeweler in East Nashville who had been in business for 30 years and clearly knew his craft. A few weeks before that, Natalie and I had spent 2 hours in his shop on a Saturday morning, supposedly just looking around. But I was paying attention. I noticed which settings made her pause. I noticed which ones she barely glanced at. I watched what she liked, what she ignored, and what made her eyes soften for just a second before she moved on. She had no idea that was what I was doing. She thought I was just being patient while she looked at jewelry. It was not the most expensive ring in the world. That was never the point. I wanted it to be the kind of ring Natalie would love every day. She understood quality, but she hated anything showy. I wanted something beautiful without being loud, something elegant without looking like it was begging for attention. The ring was simple, precise, and exactly right. In a way, it reminded me of her. So I figured the two of them belonged together. She said yes before I even finished asking the question. We called her parents from the rooftop while we were still laughing. Elaine cried. Raymond said, "Congratulations to you both." And honestly, that was more warmth than I had ever heard from him in a single sentence. I remember thinking maybe this was the turning point. Maybe now that the relationship was official, now that Natalie and I were really building a future, Raymond would finally lower his guard. We planned the engagement dinner for 3 weeks later. Making it a larger gathering was Natalie's idea. She did not want it to be only immediate family. She wanted close friends there too, along with a few colleagues from both sides. We chose Henley on Church Street in Nashville, a restaurant we both loved. It had Southern food done right, warm lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that felt special without feeling stiff or pretentious. We booked the private dining room. Natalie handled most of the planning. I took care of the reservation and the wine. 37 people showed up. At first, everything felt perfect. The room was full, warm, and alive with conversation. My mother, Margaret, had driven up from Murfreesboro, and by the time I arrived, she was already deep in conversation with Natalie's Aunt Diane. My best friend, Caleb Donovan, was standing at the bar telling a story that had 3 people laughing. Caleb had been my college roommate, and now he was a physician in Franklin. He was the kind of friend who knew every embarrassing version of me and still showed up when it mattered. Within the first 5 minutes, Elaine Whitmore found me and pulled me into a hug that felt completely genuine. She told me she was so happy. Then she said Natalie deserved someone who looked at her the way I did. That meant something to me. I felt good that night. I felt grateful. Then Raymond arrived late. He walked in with the kind of confidence that changed the temperature of the room without him ever raising his voice. It was not dramatic. It was not rude. It was just the way certain men enter a room when they are used to being the most important person in it. He shook hands. He kissed cheeks. He accepted a glass of wine. Then he made his way to the long center table and took his seat. Directly across from me, for the first hour, dinner went well. The food was excellent. There was braised short rib, roasted root vegetables, and cornbread that my mother announced was the best she had ever tasted. People told stories. There were toasts. Caleb gave one that was funny and kind at the same time, the kind of toast only someone who has known you for 15 years can give. It was specific enough to be real, and warm enough to matter. Then Elaine gave a toast that made Natalie cry, but in the good way. After that, Raymond stood up. I noticed the slight shift in the room immediately. It was like feeling the weather change before the first drop of rain. I did not notice it with my eyes at first. I felt it more in the back of my neck, like the air in the room had suddenly changed. The room got quiet. People who had been halfway through conversations stopped talking and turned their heads. That was the kind of presence he had. Raymond Whitmore. He did not need to ask for attention. People gave it to him the second he stood up. "I want to say a few words," he said, smiling around the room. It was the kind of smile a man practices, smooth, confident, polished, but it never reached his eyes. He started by talking about Natalie. He spoke about how she had always been the most determined person in any room she entered. He talked about how she had earned her place through intelligence, hard work, and a stubborn refusal to let anyone underestimate her. And the thing was, he sounded proud. Not fake proud either. He sounded like a father who truly believed every word he was saying. I believed him too, because he was right. Every bit of it was true. Those were some of the exact reasons I loved Natalie in the first place. Then he turned his attention toward me. "And Ethan," he said. Then he paused. It was not the kind of pause a person makes by accident. It was planned. It was there for effect. "I will say this," he continued. "When Natalie first brought you home, I did my homework, the way any father would." He smiled again. Same polished smile, same calm face. "You've built yourself a nice little business," he said. "Good for you." Then he looked around the room like he was letting everyone in on something. "But since we are all family here tonight, I want to be transparent." Something tightened in my chest when he said that. It was not panic. Not yet. It was more like my whole body had gone still, waiting for the blow before it landed. "My daughter has a trust fund," Raymond said, his voice steady and even. "She has a family name, a family network, and a future that was secured long before she ever met you. And I want to make something very clear, because I believe everyone in this room should understand it." Then he looked straight at me. "Men like Ethan," he said, "men who come from nothing, men who build something small and decide to call it success, tend to notice opportunity when they are standing near prosperity. I am not saying that is exactly a character flaw. Maybe it is just survival instinct, but it is the kind of thing a father pays attention to." The entire room went silent. I heard my mother set her fork down. "I am not attacking your character, Ethan," Raymond continued. He was still calm, still smiling, still completely comfortable, like humiliating me in front of everyone was just another item on the evening's schedule. "I am only being honest," he said. "The way I always am. You are marrying up, significantly. And I think everyone here can see that." He lifted his chin slightly. "I truly hope what you feel for my daughter is as real as you say it is. Because if it is not, we will find out. And my family does not forgive that kind of thing." Then he raised his glass. "To Natalie," he said, "and to wherever this road takes them." A few people lifted their glasses, but nobody looked comfortable doing it. They raised them slowly, awkwardly, like they were not sure if they had just witnessed something cruel or if they were supposed to pretend it was all harmless. I looked at Natalie. She was not looking at me. She was looking at her father. And the expression on her face was one I had never seen before. It was not shock. It was not embarrassment. It was not the red-faced horror of someone watching the man she loved get insulted in front of both families. She was almost smiling. Her shoulders were relaxed. Then someone near the far end of the table said something under their breath. To this day, I still do not know who it was. Some cousin of hers, probably. I could not have told you his name then, and I definitely could not tell you now. I did not catch the comment. But Natalie did. And she laughed. Not loudly. Not in some big, obvious way. It was small and soft. The kind of quiet little laugh people make when they think something is funny, but are trying not to show it too much. But I heard it. She laughed. And in that moment, something became clear to me that I wish I had understood much earlier. This was not Raymond losing control. This was not some sudden outburst from an overprotective father who had gone too far after a few drinks. This was not a surprise attack that shocked his daughter as much as it shocked me. No. This was a man saying out loud, at our engagement dinner, in front of 37 people, exactly what he really thought of me. And his daughter, the woman wearing my ring, had listened to it and found some part of it funny enough to smile. I sat there with that realization for about 30 seconds. Then I reached across the table and picked up the ring box sitting near the centerpiece. Natalie had placed it there herself as part of the celebration. She had wanted people to see it. I opened the box. Then I took the ring off Natalie's finger. That was when she finally looked at me. The half-smile disappeared from her face. I placed the ring on the white tablecloth directly between us, right where everyone at the table could see it. Then I folded my napkin, and I stood up. I took my jacket off the back of my chair. Then I looked at my mother. She was watching me with clear eyes and a calm face, but I knew her well enough to understand what that look meant. She knew exactly what she had just seen. I glanced at Caleb next. He had set his glass down, and he was making a very careful effort not to show any reaction at all. His face was controlled, almost too controlled. Then I looked at Raymond Whitmore. He was watching me with a look I can only describe as professional curiosity, like he had expected something like this to happen and was simply observing how the situation would play out. I did not say a word to him. I did not say a word to anyone. I just walked out of the private dining room, crossed through the main floor of Henley, past the bar, and moved by tables full of people having normal Friday night dinners. People who had no idea what had just happened in that back room. Then I pushed through the glass front doors and stepped out into the cold November air on Church Street in Nashville. I stood there on the sidewalk for about a minute, just breathing. That night, the air in Nashville was cold enough that I could see my breath in front of me. Traffic moved along Church Street. Ubers and taxis pulled up and drove away. People were heading toward the bar district a few blocks east. Someone passed by walking a dog wearing those tiny little booties on its paws, and the dog looked like it found the whole thing deeply humiliating. It was a completely normal Friday night. The world did not care at all about what had just happened inside that restaurant. And somehow, in that moment, I found that both ridiculous and strangely comforting. I thought about going back inside. I will be honest about that. I stood on that sidewalk and told myself I could still turn around. I could walk back into that room, sit down, finish dinner, and deal with everything tomorrow in private, where things like that were supposed to be handled. That would have been the mature thing to do. That would have been the calm, composed thing to do. But then I thought about my mother sitting at that table after hearing every word Raymond had said. My mother had raised me by herself. She had worked double shifts for years. Not once in my entire life had she ever made me feel like we were beneath anybody. And now she had been forced to sit there, while some rich man told a room full of people that her son was only interested in another family's money. That was when I knew I was not going back inside. I got into my truck and drove home. Natalie texted me 11 minutes after I left. Then she called. Then she texted again. Then she called again. I read every message. I did not answer any of them. They came in one after another. Ethan, where are you? Then, Ethan, please. Then, I know that was horrible and I am so sorry. Then, please just talk to me. Then, I understand why you left, but we need to talk tonight. Then, this is not the end of us. Please do not make this the end of us. I turned my phone face down on the kitchen counter and sat there in the dark for a long time. My mother called me at 10:30. I answered. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not tell me what I should do. She did not try to push me one way or the other. All she said was, "I watched your face across that table tonight. I want you to know that I am proud of you." Then she told me she was going to drive back to Murfreesboro and that I should call her in the morning. I told her I would. She said she loved me. I told her I loved her too. Then we hung up. I did not sleep that night. Natalie came home around midnight. I was still sitting in the kitchen. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table. It was the same table where we had eaten Sunday breakfasts together. The same table where she used to spread out work documents late at night. The same table where we had talked about our future with the easy confidence of two people who believed they already knew exactly what that future would look like. She looked exhausted. Her makeup was smeared, and it was obvious she had been crying. "I'm so sorry," she said. I looked at her for a moment. "What exactly are you sorry for?" "For what my dad said," she answered. "For the way he said it. For not defending you the second he said it." "You laughed," I said. She closed her eyes. "I know." "I need you to explain that to me, Natalie," I said. "Because I have been sitting here for 4 hours trying to understand how the woman who agreed to marry me could sit at our engagement dinner and laugh while her father told 37 people I was a gold digger." "I wasn't laughing at what he said," she said. "I was laughing at something Chloe said beside me, something unrelated." "It was related," I said. "You were laughing in that exact moment," I said. The room felt what it felt, and I felt it too. She went quiet. "Did you know he was going to say something like that?" I asked. Another silence followed. This one lasted longer. "I knew he had concerns," she said carefully. "He has brought them up before. Not exactly like that. But yes, before." "He brought them up before," I repeated. "And you never told me." "I thought I could handle him," she said. "I thought tonight was going to be a celebration. I thought he would be gracious, and everything would be fine." "You thought he would be gracious," I said slowly. "After he had already told you, in private, that he was worried I was with you for your money. You thought he would stand in front of a room full of people and suddenly decide to be gracious." She had nothing to say to that. "Here is what I need you to understand," I said. "I do not care about your trust fund. I have never cared about your trust fund. I already have more money than I know what to do with. Not your family's kind of money. I understand that. But it is mine, and I earned every dollar of it." I leaned back slightly, trying to keep myself steady. "Your father stood up tonight and told a room full of people who know me, including my own mother, that I am some kind of fraud, and you sat there and laughed." "Ethan, I am not finished." I was not yelling. I did not even feel the need to raise my voice. My voice was calm, which somehow made the room feel even colder. "The ring is still on the table at Henley. I assume somebody brought it back. I do not want it back. And right now, I am not interested in having a conversation about whether this engagement continues or not." I looked at her directly. "What I want to understand is something very simple. Is your father's opinion of me something you agree with? Even a little? Even somewhere deep down where you do not want to admit it?" She stared at me for a long time. "No," she said. "Absolutely not." "But you let him say it." "I did not let him." "You laughed." The silence after that filled the whole room. There was nothing small about it. It sat between us like another person at the table. After a while, she got up and left the kitchen. She went to bed. I stayed exactly where I was until morning. The next 10 days were some of the strangest days of my adult life. Natalie and I were polite to each other in that careful way. Two people are polite when they are trying to figure out whether they are about to save something important or end it for good. We still ate meals together. We still talked about practical things, work schedules, errands, a plumbing issue in the guest bathroom that needed to be fixed, no matter what was happening between us. But everything felt measured. We were gentle with each other in a way that did not feel loving. It felt cautious. And that kind of caution tells you more than any argument ever could. Something had broken. That Sunday, Caleb came over, and we sat on my back porch for 3 hours. He did not try to tell me what to do. He just listened. When I finally stopped talking, he said, "You know what the real issue is, right?" I looked at him. "It is not just what Raymond said," Caleb said. "It is that she already knew he thought that way, and she managed that information without telling you." "I know," I said. "So, what are you going to do?" "I do not know yet." 5 days after the dinner, Raymond Whitmore called me. I almost did not answer. I almost let it go straight to voicemail. But something in me made me pick up. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe I just wanted to hear what a man like him would possibly say after what he had done. "Ethan," he said. His voice sounded exactly the way it always did. Calm, controlled, even. "I owe you an apology." I said nothing. "What I said at dinner was inappropriate," he continued. "It was not the right venue, and it was not the right tone. I want you to know that I understand that." I noticed something right away. He was apologizing for the venue. He was apologizing for the tone. He was not apologizing for what he actually believed. "Do you believe what you said?" I asked. There was a pause, but it was shorter than I expected. "I believe my daughter has worked hard for everything she has," he said. "And I believe it is my responsibility to protect what she has built." "That is not what I asked," I said. "Do you believe I am with Natalie for her money?" This time, the pause lasted longer. "I believe," he said finally, "that human motivations are complicated, and I believe it is a father's job to ask uncomfortable questions." "I see," I said. "Ethan." "Mr. Whitmore," I said, cutting him off. Then I sat up straighter. "I grew up in a house in Smyrna, Tennessee, where my mother worked double shifts at a nursing home for 8 years while I was in school. I wore the same pair of jeans for 2 years in middle school because we could not afford new ones. I built my company using a credit card I maxed out twice before the business finally started working." I let that sit for a second. "I have never asked your daughter for anything, and I never would. But I want to make something clear," I said. "I heard every word you said at that dinner, and I heard what you chose not to say just now." Then I added, "Have a good evening," and I hung up. Natalie found out about the call later that night. She asked me what her father had said, so I told her. She sat quietly for a moment, taking it in. Then she said, "He did not actually apologize, did he? It was not really a question." "Not for the part that mattered," I said. And that was the moment I saw something change in Natalie's face. Not at the dinner. Not when I brought up the laugh. Not during any of the long silences that came afterward. It was then. It was like some piece of information had finally finished moving through her mind and landed somewhere she had not expected it to land. "I have been managing him my whole life," she said very quietly. "I learned how to do it so well that I stopped even noticing when I was doing it." "And where does that leave me?" I asked. She did not answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was small. "I do not know. I want to be fair to her here, because this story is not simple. And Natalie is not a villain." Over the next 2 weeks, she and I had conversations that, looking back, we probably should have had before we ever got engaged. Real conversations. Not the comfortable kind where two people sit together and talk about the future like it is already guaranteed. Not the easy planning conversations about houses, schedules, vacations, and what life might look like 5 years from now. These were harder conversations. They were about family, about loyalty, about what it means to be chosen by the person you love, and what it means to belong to a family with its own weight, its own pull, and its own rules. She told me things she had never told me before. She told me Raymond had pushed back against every serious relationship she had ever had. Before me, there had been a man named Mason, a lawyer from Memphis. They had been together for 3 years before Raymond slowly took the relationship apart. He did not do it all at once. He did it carefully. Quiet criticism here, a planted doubt there. Small comments that seemed harmless in the moment, but kept building over time. Eventually, Natalie said, she could no longer see Mason clearly through the fog of her father's opinions. She told me she had convinced herself she was different now, smarter, more independent, better able to separate her own judgment from her father's voice. She said she truly believed that when she said yes to my proposal. She also told me that when Raymond brought up his concerns about me in private, she honestly thought she could manage it. She thought she could keep him at arm's length emotionally without having to make a real choice. She believed his concerns would fade on their own once he spent more time with me and saw who I actually was. Then she told me what happened from her side when he stood up at the dinner. She said that the moment he started speaking, it felt like the floor dropped out from under her. And instead of standing up, interrupting him, and putting a stop to it, she froze. She said the laugh I saw, the laugh everyone saw, was not agreement. It was not amusement at my expense. It was not her finding the insult funny. It was what her body does when she is overwhelmed and mortified, beyond knowing how to react. A sound came out of her that did not match what she was feeling inside. And the hard part was, I believed her. I really did. I could hear the truth in what she was telling me. She was not some woman who secretly agreed with her father's opinion of me. She was a woman who had spent 34 years learning how to survive under the force of her father's personality. And she had not yet figured out how to fully step out from under it. The question was whether she could actually change that. And the other question was whether I was willing to wait around long enough to find out. We decided to spend 3 days apart. Natalie stayed with Elaine. I stayed at the house. I worked. Every morning at 6, I went running through Percy Warner Park in the cold and dark. There is something about running in that kind of quiet that clears my head in a way nothing else can. On the 3rd day, I called Caleb. If you go back, he said, Raymond wins. I did not answer. He tested you at that dinner, Caleb continued. Maybe he did not think of it that way consciously, but that is what he did. He wanted to see if you would fold. I listened while he talked. If you go back to that engagement without something having structurally changed, then you are telling him you will absorb whatever he throws at you and stay anyway. And if that happens, you will spend the rest of your marriage managing that man. And if I do not go back, I asked. Then you lose Natalie, he said. And you love her. And she is not the same person as her father. That is not a very helpful framework, I said. No, Caleb said. It is not. Because there is no clean answer here. There is only what you can live with. I thought about what Caleb said for 2 more days. On the 5th day, Natalie came back. She sat across from me at that same kitchen table again. I could tell just by looking at her that she had been thinking as hard as I had. She looked tired, but not in a careless way. She looked like somebody who had been forced to look straight at things she had avoided for a long time. "I spoke to a therapist," she said, "3 times this past week." I stayed quiet. "I have been going over things I should have dealt with years ago," she continued. "Things about my father, about the patterns, about the way I react to him." I waited for her to keep going. "I am not asking you to pretend the dinner never happened," she said. "I am not asking you to forgive my father. What I am asking is whether you believe I am capable of choosing differently than I have in the past." She took a breath. "Because I believe I am. But I also understand that you have no reason to just take my word for it." "What does choosing differently actually look like?" I asked. "It means I have already told my father that if he does not give you a real apology, a genuine one, an unconditional one, then he will not be at our wedding." She looked me right in the eye. "And I do not mean an apology for the place he said it, or the tone he used. I mean an apology for the accusation itself. And I meant every word when I told him that." I studied her face carefully. "You told him that?" "Yes." "What did he say?" She held my gaze. "He said he would need time to think about it." "And what did you say to that?" "I told him he had 2 weeks," she said. "And that while he was taking those 2 weeks, I would be using that time to decide whether the man I am engaged to is someone I am willing to fight for. Loudly, publicly, and without apology from this point forward." Her voice shook a little, but she did not look away. "And the answer is yes," she said. "The answer has always been yes. I just needed to stop being afraid of him long enough to act like it." I sat with that for a long time. I am not going to pretend everything became simple after that. It did not. Trust is not a light switch. You do not flip it back on after one honest conversation at a kitchen table. You rebuild trust slowly. You rebuild it through 100 small moments. You rebuild it by watching whether someone acts differently when it matters. You find out whether the promises a person makes late at night, when emotions are high, are the same promises they keep later when things get difficult. But I will say this. In the months after that dinner, I watched Natalie Whitmore fight for us in a way that took real courage. She confronted her father in conversations I was not part of, and then she told me about them afterward. She set boundaries around what he was allowed to say, how he was allowed to behave, and what would happen if he crossed those lines again. She did not handle it privately, and then hand me some neat, finished version of her family, like everything had been cleaned up. She showed me the work. She let me see the process while it was still messy, imperfect, and ongoing. Raymond came to our apartment in February. He sat across from me at that same kitchen table, a different chair than Natalie's, but the same table. He looked at me for a long moment before he said anything. What he said was not everything I wanted to hear. I will not lie about that. He did not break down with regret. He did not give some perfect speech that would have satisfied every person who heard what he said that night. But he looked at me and said, "I was wrong about what I implied at that dinner. I have watched you since then, through my daughter's eyes, through what she has told me, and through what I have finally allowed myself to see. I was wrong." Then he held out his hand. I shook it. Not because it erased what happened, not because we were suddenly fine, but because Natalie had stood up to her father and made it clear she was choosing me. Because the ring was back on her finger. Because we had 340 days until the wedding. And because I was not willing to spend every one of those days replaying that dinner in my head. There are things I understand now that I did not understand 2.5 years ago, when I first introduced myself to Natalie Whitmore after a panel session in Nashville. I understand that loving someone is not enough by itself. You also have to understand the world they come from. Not so you can judge it, not so you can hold it against them, but so you can see which parts of that world they are still carrying with them and which parts they have finally learned to set down. When you miss that, you do not know the person as clearly as you think you do. And sooner or later, something will show you what you failed to see. Sometimes it is something small, something recoverable, a moment of friction that teaches you something useful and then passes. And sometimes it is an engagement dinner where the woman you love laughs while her father takes you apart in front of everyone you know. I know now that the way a person acts during the worst moment of a public humiliation does not always define who they are. But it does tell you something. It gives you real information, and that information deserves real weight. The question is not whether you should take it into account. You should. The real question is how much weight you give it. And the only way to answer that is by watching what happens afterward. You watch whether that person shows up the next day, then the day after that, then the day after that. You watch whether they keep choosing to show up differently. Natalie did not do it perfectly. She did it messily, and over a longer stretch of time than I would have preferred. But she did show up. I also know that Raymond Whitmore is not a monster. He is a man who held so much control over his family's world for so many years that somewhere along the way, he lost the ability to tell the difference between protecting someone and dominating them. That night, he truly believed he was protecting his daughter. That does not make what he did acceptable. It does not excuse it. But understanding it makes it possible for me to stand in the same room with him. And that was something Natalie needed me to be able to do. Marriage is not only about two people joining their lives together. It is also about dealing with everyone and everything those two people bring into the room with them. Before that dinner, I understood that in theory. Now I understand it in my bones. I also understand the version of myself who walked out of Henley that November night. The man who placed the ring on the table without saying a word. The man who refused to turn that room into a public shouting match. The man who simply removed himself from a situation that no longer felt like a place he belonged. That version of me was not being cold. He was not being passive. He was not trying to make some dramatic statement. He was just being honest. He had been told something important about the room he was standing in, and he responded to that information clearly. I am proud of him for that. That instinct, the one that says, I will not stay somewhere that treats me like less than I am, is worth holding on to. Even when staying would be easier. Even when walking away costs you something real. I know my mother, Margaret Walker, drove all the way from Murfreesboro to celebrate her son's engagement. She sat at that table while a man told a room full of people that her son was nothing more than a gold digger. And when she called me the next morning, she did not make the conversation about what had been done to us. She simply asked if I was okay. Then she told me she was proud of me. And she meant both things. That is the kind of woman my mother is. Everything I know about dignity, I learned from her long before I ever had a reason to use it. And I know this too. Natalie and I are getting married in 11 months. It will be a small ceremony at a farm outside Franklin, Tennessee, with fewer than 50 people there. Caleb will be my best man. Elaine will give a toast. Raymond will be there, and he will behave, because Natalie has made the terms very clear. They are not suggestions. They are not up for debate. I do not know what Raymond and I will become over time. Maybe nothing more than two men who can tolerate each other. Maybe something better, if enough years pass and he keeps choosing to act like the better version of himself. I am not holding my breath. But I am not holding a grudge either. Grudges are heavy. And I have a wedding to get to. As for the ring, the same one that sat on a white tablecloth in the private dining room at Henley on Church Street for about 22 minutes while I drove home through downtown Nashville, it fits perfectly. It always did. That moment when I set the ring on the table and walked out without saying a single word is the part I keep coming back to. Because most people, when they are humiliated like that, either explode or freeze. They either make the pain loud, or they shrink themselves down and try to make it disappear. I did neither. I just left calmly, with my dignity still intact. And I think there is something powerful in that. Dignity does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply stands up quietly and walks out. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have walked out the way I did? Or would you have stayed and fought back right there in that room? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this is the kind of storytelling you are looking for, hit subscribe. There is a lot more coming.